The first taste of resilience. The city glimmered as if in celebration, each light like a distant star casting a glow on Evelyn Anderson's entrance into La Belle Amour, one of the most prestigious restaurants in New York City. At 72, Evelyn was a striking figure. Her tailored dark green dress hugged her figure with dignified elegance, a contrast to the fast-paced hustle outside. Her hair, a soft white cloud, added to her regal air, and her stride was confident yet graceful. Evelyn rarely dined alone, but tonight was different. It was an occasion, a personal triumph for her son, Marcus, who had recently acquired this very restaurant as part of his expanding empire. She smiled, recalling his words from last week. "Mom, this restaurant is something special. It's where you can come anytime, and they'll treat you like royalty." But Evelyn didn't need royal treatment. All she ever wanted was respect. As she entered, the air of luxury enveloped her. The ambience was sophisticated but subdued, designed for those who appreciated beauty without a lot of fanfare. The chandeliers cast a warm, honeyed glow across the room, while a pianist in the corner played soft classical melodies, giving the setting a refined elegance. "Good evening," Evelyn greeted the maitre d', a young woman with a tight bun and a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I have a reservation under Anderson," Evelyn stated confidently. The maitre d' gave her a quick once-over, her brow raising slightly before she tapped on the tablet in front of her. There was an almost imperceptible hesitation before she responded. "Ah, yes. Anderson. Right this way." Evelyn noted the pause but brushed it off. She was here to enjoy a peaceful meal, and a little pause was not enough to unsettle her. As she followed the maitre d' through the restaurant, she felt the subtle weight of gazes landing on her. A middle-aged couple, dressed in sleek designer outfits, watched her pass with thinly veiled curiosity. An older gentleman leaned toward his companion, muttering something Evelyn chose not to decipher. Grace had been her armor all her life, and tonight would be no different. The maitre d' led her to a table by the window, a secluded spot, but one offering a beautiful view of the city's skyline. Evelyn couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the panoramic sight, the shimmering lights of the city framed by elegant velvet drapes. As she took her seat, she noticed a familiar presence nearby. Marcus himself, seated unobtrusively at a small table a few rows away. Unbeknownst to her, he had come to observe how the staff treated guests, particularly when they thought he was absent. His table was concealed by an arrangement of indoor plants, allowing him an uninterrupted view of the main dining area, including his mother's table. As Evelyn settled in, her server for the evening approached, a woman with platinum blonde hair and a tight bun, her expression carefully neutral but not warm. Her name tag read Lily. Lily offered Evelyn a tight-lipped smile that conveyed neither warmth nor courtesy. "Good evening, ma'am. Would you like to hear about the specials?" Her tone was brisk, almost rushed, as though Evelyn's presence was a minor inconvenience in her otherwise busy evening. "Yes, please," Evelyn responded, her voice calm and patient. She took in the restaurant's ambience once more, trying to savor the experience, but Lily's demeanor was distracting. It was as if Evelyn's table was beneath her consideration. Lily rattled off the specials at a speed that made it nearly impossible to catch each dish's nuances. Her tone was dismissive, as if Evelyn wouldn't understand or appreciate the sophisticated menu items anyway. "Could I trouble you for a glass of water first?" Evelyn asked, her voice gentle yet firm. Lily's response was a curt nod, her movements sharp as she spun on her heel. It was apparent that Evelyn's request had slightly irritated her. Her hurried footsteps led her back to the kitchen without another word. Watching from his hidden vantage point, Marcus noticed his mother's composed response to Lily's impatience. He knew Evelyn had been through worse, and her patience was a testament to her strength. But he also recognized that no guest, especially his mother, should endure even subtle dismissiveness in his restaurant. Several minutes passed before Lily returned, this time holding a glass of water. She set it down with a slight thud, a noise just noticeable enough to disrupt the serene ambience at Evelyn's table. Evelyn took a sip, unaffected by the cold gesture, maintaining her calm. When it was time to order, Evelyn asked politely, "I'd like to start with the mushroom bisque, and then the seared salmon." The salmon. Lily's brows shot up briefly, and for a second she seemed to stifle a chuckle. "The salmon is one of our premium selections," she added, her tone steeped in a subtle but unmistakable judgment. Evelyn's eyes met Lily's directly, a soft but unwavering gaze. "Yes, the salmon," she said, her tone firm but gracious. From his table, Marcus felt a flash of anger rise. He watched as his mother handled the situation with dignity, but he couldn't shake the anger brewing within him. It wasn't the first time he had seen prejudice rear its head in seemingly respectable places, but witnessing it in his own establishment, and toward his own mother, was different. As Lily took the order, she barely concealed her distaste, and the subtle disregard in her eyes was evident to anyone observing closely. Back in the kitchen, Lily mumbled to another server, "You see these types come in, acting like they belong just because they put on a little nice dress. Makes you wonder if they know how much this salmon actually costs." The other server shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Lily's tone was full of a quiet but bitter resentment, a bias that, to her, seemed almost natural. She returned to Evelyn's table, her stance rigid, her smile as thin as the lines on her face. Evelyn, meanwhile, waited with the same dignified patience she had cultivated over decades. She was used to prejudice appearing in small, insidious forms, and if she had learned anything over the years, it was that silence could be louder than words. Her silence, combined with her composed posture, was a statement in itself. But Marcus, witnessing all this, couldn't simply watch his mother bear the brunt of such dismissiveness. He felt a responsibility, not only as her son but also as the restaurant owner, to address this deeply ingrained disrespect. For tonight, however, he would remain silent, observing each interaction and waiting to see just how far the server would go in her subtle yet unmistakable disdain. The night continued with each subtle slight like a splinter, compounding the tension. Evelyn's quiet dignity only highlighted Lily's sharp rudeness more. The night was far from over, and Marcus knew that soon there would be a time for him to make his presence known in the most impactful way. Subtle disrespect. The clinking of glasses and quiet murmurs in La Belle Amour created a low, ambient hum that contrasted starkly with the silent exchange happening at Evelyn's table. As she waited for her meal, Evelyn remained unfazed by the subtle dismissiveness of her server, Lily. To anyone else, her demeanor might have appeared serene, but Marcus knew his mother well enough to recognize the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her hands rested perfectly still on the table. These were subtle cues, but Marcus, watching closely from his hidden seat, could feel the growing discomfort. He was accustomed to observing the inner workings of his restaurants with a critical eye. Years in the hospitality industry had sharpened his ability to notice the details others might miss. But tonight, as he observed Lily's behavior toward his mother, his scrutiny took on a personal edge. He knew how it felt to face quiet prejudice, often veiled in politeness. He had built his business with the vision of creating spaces where anyone, regardless of their background, could feel welcomed and respected. Yet tonight, that vision felt tainted. Lily returned to Evelyn's table with the first course, the mushroom bisque, which she set down with a faint air of impatience. Evelyn thanked her softly, but Lily's response was a brisk nod before she turned away to attend another table. Marcus noticed how she treated a nearby group of diners with contrasting enthusiasm. Her voice was warm, nearly unrecognizable from the clipped tone she used with Evelyn. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Would you like to hear about our special pairing tonight?" Lily's voice carried across the room, exuding friendliness and professionalism as she described a wine selection in detail, discussing each note as if sharing a personal experience. She smiled brightly, leaning forward just enough to signal her attentiveness, and made the patrons feel like honored guests. From his vantage point, Marcus could see how the guests responded, smiling back, nodding in appreciation. He felt a simmer of frustration as he watched Lily's divided demeanor, animated and eager with some, cold and dismissive with others. And while his mother received the latter, Evelyn's elegance remained undiminished. She picked up her spoon, took a sip of the bisque, and placed it down thoughtfully. Evelyn knew Marcus was watching. She sensed his protective gaze, the same way she had sensed it when he was a young boy trying to shield her from life's small unkindnesses. Back then, he had been too young to understand the world fully, and she had done her best to teach him that strength didn't always mean fighting every battle. Sometimes, it meant choosing when to act and when to remain composed. Evelyn had long accepted that some people's minds were closed and filled with prejudices they themselves didn't recognize. Yet she also knew the importance of standing one's ground and setting a quiet example. When Lily returned, Evelyn addressed her kindly. "Excuse me, dear, this soup seems to have a slightly different seasoning than I'm used to. Could I trouble you to ask the chef if he used something new?" The simple question seemed to annoy Lily, who shifted her weight and rolled her eyes so quickly it was almost imperceptible. "The chef knows what he's doing, ma'am," she said, her voice laced with impatience. "It's one of our signature soups, very popular with our patrons." A slight frown crossed Evelyn's brow. She placed her spoon down carefully, choosing not to engage further. Marcus, however, clenched his fists beneath the tablecloth. It was one thing for Lily to be dismissive, but another entirely to imply that his mother's opinion didn't matter. Several tables away, the conversation had shifted as guests noticed the disparity in Lily's service. A man in his early 60s nudged his partner and whispered, "Is she really ignoring that woman? I thought this place was known for exceptional service." His partner, a woman in an elegant navy dress, shrugged. "It's strange. I've never seen a server act this way here. They're usually so attentive." As wordlessly as she had arrived, Lily cleared Evelyn's soup dish, practically snatching the bowl from the table without even a glance in Evelyn's direction. Marcus observed as Lily shot Evelyn a brief, almost triumphant look, one that suggested she was enjoying this subtle exercise of power. Evelyn took a steadying breath, choosing to remain silent. She had seen that look before, one that implied superiority without any true basis. It was a look that told her everything she needed to know about Lily's assumptions and her narrow perception of who belonged in this restaurant. As much as the behavior stung, Evelyn maintained her quiet dignity, refusing to lower herself to a confrontation that could escalate. Marcus, however, was nearing the end of his patience. The restraint he had exercised so far felt increasingly impossible to maintain. He wanted to rise from his seat, walk over to his mother's table, and put an end to this behavior right then and there. But he resisted, telling himself that he needed to gather more information, to let the situation unfold just a bit longer. He wanted to see if anyone else would notice, and if any of his staff would intervene. The main course was finally brought out, and Evelyn's chosen seared salmon was placed in front of her. Yet something seemed off, both to her and to Marcus. The dish looked hastily prepared, the sauce slightly off-center, and the vegetables not as finely arranged as those at the neighboring tables. It was a small thing, perhaps only noticeable to those who understood the meticulous standards of fine dining, but it was a deliberate insult nonetheless. When Evelyn took a bite, she found the seasoning to be overwhelmingly salty, as if it had been done carelessly, or worse, intentionally. She took a small sip of her water, glancing up at Marcus's table with a tiny shake of her head, signaling her awareness of the situation. Lily returned, her expression one of feigned politeness as she asked, "How is everything?" The question was more of a formality than a genuine inquiry. Before Evelyn could respond, Lily's eyes drifted to another table, where a younger couple was waving her over, clearly indicating her lack of interest in Evelyn's experience. Evelyn responded anyway, her tone calm but direct. "It seems the dish is a bit saltier than usual. Perhaps the chef has tried something new." Lily smirked. "It's exactly as it's supposed to be, ma'am," she replied curtly. "It's meant to have a bold flavor profile. We're very particular about our salmon." Evelyn nodded, saying nothing more. Marcus, however, had reached his tipping point. He waited until Lily had moved to another table before discreetly calling a different server, a young man named David, over to his table. "David," Marcus said quietly, "I'd like to speak with the chef after my mother's meal is completed. Please inform him discreetly." David's face showed a glimmer of surprise, but he quickly nodded, disappearing into the kitchen. The other staff had begun to notice the disparities in Lily's service, whispering among themselves. It wasn't long before word spread quietly through the staff that something was wrong, though they weren't sure yet how it would be handled. Meanwhile, the ambience of the restaurant shifted subtly. Patrons around Evelyn's table began casting furtive glances her way, picking up on the tension but unsure how to react. Some appeared uncomfortable, clearly noticing Lily's behavior, but reluctant to speak up, perhaps out of fear of disrupting their own evening. One woman, seated at a nearby table with her husband, finally leaned over to her husband and whispered, "It's disgraceful, really. Look at how that server is treating her. Do you think we should say something?" Her husband, a distinguished-looking man in his 70s, shook his head thoughtfully. "I don't know. It's not our place. But it does leave a sour taste, doesn't it?" As the couple whispered among themselves, Evelyn maintained her composure, her eyes calm and focused, refusing to give Lily the satisfaction of a reaction. Marcus, meanwhile, steeled himself for the moment that would come soon enough, a moment where the elegance of his restaurant would be upheld, and the values he held dear would be defended. In the midst of it all, Evelyn felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that, despite Lily's behavior, she had not wavered. She had carried herself with the same dignity she always had. And though she didn't know exactly what Marcus planned, she trusted him enough to know that, by the end of the evening, there would be a reckoning. The evening continued with a delicate tension building in the room, felt by staff and patrons alike. Each small, slight, and dismissive gesture from Lily only made the upcoming confrontation more inevitable. Marcus watched carefully, waiting for the precise moment to make his presence known and to set things right in a way that would leave a lasting impression, not just on Lily, but on everyone who had watched the evening's events unfold. The cracks began to show. The low hum of conversation had softened noticeably in La Belle Amour as more guests tuned into the quiet tension at Evelyn Anderson's table. The elegant decor, designed to cocoon diners in luxury, seemed unable to mask the discomfort spreading through the restaurant. Some patrons avoided looking directly at Evelyn's table, while others exchanged hushed comments, their curiosity mingling with unease. It was rare to witness such blatant dismissiveness in such a high-end establishment, and rarer still to feel a silent tension so palpable it touched every corner of the room. Marcus had seen enough. Every slight directed toward his mother had chipped away at his patience, but he needed just a bit more evidence, a final act that would justify the course he was preparing to take. He observed Lily as she moved fluidly across the dining floor, her demeanor switching between warm attentiveness and barely masked indifference, depending on whom she was serving. Her body language around Evelyn had become more pronounced, her movements brisk and mechanical, while she reserved her smiles and lingering attention for other tables. Lily's composure was beginning to crack, however. She had sensed the growing awareness from both the staff and guests of the uneven treatment she was doling out. Every time she moved toward Evelyn's table, it was with an air of forced calm, but Marcus could see the irritation simmering beneath the surface. She was aware of her audience now, and though she reveled in the power she felt over Evelyn, the growing disapproval around her was beginning to unsettle her confidence. At Evelyn's table, Marcus's mother remained calm, her dignity unshaken. Evelyn was no stranger to these situations, and though she had hoped her son's restaurant would prove to be an oasis of fairness, she wasn't surprised that prejudice had followed her here. Instead of reacting to Lily's dismissiveness, Evelyn kept her focus on her meal, her movements controlled, each bite taken with deliberate grace. Then, as if to punctuate her disdain, Lily approached Evelyn once more, her expression taut and her voice curt. "Ma'am, would you like the dessert menu?" The question was phrased less as an offer and more as an obligation. "Yes, I'd like to see the menu, thank you," Evelyn responded evenly, offering Lily the same courtesy she had extended from the beginning. Marcus's fingers tapped rhythmically against the edge of his table, a silent metronome of his simmering frustration. Each tap mirrored his controlled restraint, but he knew the time for action was approaching. He wanted to expose Lily's behavior in a way that would be unignorable, to force every witness in the room to acknowledge the ugliness unfolding beneath the restaurant's elegant veneer. As Lily walked back toward the kitchen, she noticed Marcus's table for the first time. She froze, her eyes flickering with recognition. Marcus was a familiar face within the restaurant's circle of staff and patrons, but he rarely visited his establishments without introducing himself. The realization of his presence unsettled her, and for a fleeting moment, Marcus saw fear flash across her face. But the moment was brief, and she quickly masked it with a forced smile, likely assuming he hadn't been watching her. Behind the scenes, however, whispers were spreading among the staff. David, the young server who had spoken briefly with Marcus earlier, exchanged glances with his colleagues. The tension wasn't lost on them. And though they hadn't seen every detail of the interaction between Lily and Evelyn, they knew something was deeply wrong. "Did you see how she's been treating that lady?" one of the kitchen staff murmured to David as he passed by. David nodded grimly. "She's pushing it way too far. It's like she thinks she's untouchable. I wouldn't be surprised if Mr. Anderson steps in soon." Just as David predicted, the moment had arrived. Evelyn's dessert, a simple but perfectly crafted crème brûlée, was set to be delivered to her table. Yet, in a final act of contempt, Lily had chosen to mar it in a way she thought would go unnoticed. In the quietest corner of the kitchen, believing herself to be unseen, she whispered something to the sous chef, who reluctantly complied with her request to add extra salt to the dessert instead of sugar. The sous chef cast her a wary look, but, intimidated by her authority and unwilling to confront her, did as she asked. Evelyn, still seated with perfect composure, looked at her dessert with appreciation as it was set before her. She lifted her spoon with anticipation and took a delicate bite. Almost immediately, her face registered a slight surprise, her brow furrowing as the unexpected bitterness of salt hit her taste buds. She took a small sip of water to cleanse her palate, and with the same grace she had shown all evening, placed her spoon down. It was a small moment, but it was enough. Marcus rose from his table, his movements deliberate and precise, as he crossed the room toward Evelyn. Every eye turned to him as he reached her side, and with a gentle smile, asked, "Mom, is everything all right?" Evelyn looked up at her son, her eyes conveying a mix of reassurance and unspoken understanding. "Everything's fine, dear, though I did notice the dessert seems different from what I'm used to." Marcus nodded, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder before turning to the room at large. His voice carried across the dining area, calm yet authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone polite but commanding, "I apologize for the interruption, but I believe it's important to address a matter that affects the experience of every guest here." The diners turned toward him, their murmurs fading into silence as they listened. Marcus's gaze shifted to Lily, who now stood frozen near the kitchen entrance, her face a mask of shock and dread. "Tonight," Marcus continued, "I've witnessed service that falls short of the values we uphold at La Belle Amour. We pride ourselves on treating each guest with the respect and dignity they deserve. Yet, some of you may have noticed behavior that contradicts this standard." Lily's face flushed, her eyes darting from side to side, as if seeking an escape. She seemed to shrink under the weight of Marcus's words, her shoulders hunched, and her once confident posture diminished. "Respect is not reserved for a select few," Marcus continued, his tone sharpening. "It's a core value, something we extend to every person who enters our establishment. That includes every mother, father, friend, and guest who has chosen to dine with us tonight. His voice softened slightly as he looked back at Evelyn. "This is my mother, Evelyn Anderson. And tonight, I had hoped she would experience the excellence and warmth we promise every guest. Sadly, that wasn't the case." The room remained utterly silent, the weight of Marcus's words sinking in as diners processed the gravity of the situation. Some looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. Others exchanged glances of empathy and understanding. A few were visibly appalled, realizing the extent of the mistreatment that had occurred. Finally, Marcus turned to Lily, his gaze unwavering. "Lily," he said evenly, "I believe it's time for you to leave. Your behavior tonight has not only disrespected a valued guest, but has undermined the integrity of this establishment. I'm afraid your actions leave us no choice." Lily opened her mouth to protest, but the words faltered as she looked into Marcus's resolute eyes. She glanced around the room, her face flushed with shame, as she realized there would be no support for her here. With a shaky nod, she muttered, "Fine," and without further argument, walked swiftly toward the exit. The sound of her footsteps echoed across the polished floor, a final reminder of the night's events. As the doors closed behind her, Marcus addressed the guests once more. "Thank you for your patience, everyone. It is never pleasant to address such matters, but it is necessary to ensure we maintain a place where every guest feels valued." Turning back to his mother, Marcus's face softened, his voice now just for her. "Mom, would you allow me the honor of preparing a dessert that meets your standards?" Evelyn smiled, her eyes gleaming with pride and warmth. "I'd love that, Marcus. Thank you." The staff, many of whom had witnessed the events unfold, breathed a collective sigh of relief. David approached Marcus, offering to help with anything he needed, and Marcus nodded, grateful for his loyalty. In the kitchen, Marcus took special care in preparing a new crème brûlée himself, carefully torching the sugar into a golden crust. He presented it to his mother with a smile, setting it gently in front of her, with a flourish worthy of the finest culinary artists. The guests around them watched as Evelyn took her first bite, her face lighting up with satisfaction as the creamy sweetness melted on her tongue. The tension in the room gradually lifted, replaced by a renewed sense of admiration and appreciation for the restaurant's values. As the evening drew to a close, several patrons approached Marcus and Evelyn, expressing their admiration for the grace with which they had handled the situation. Others offered quiet apologies for not having spoken up sooner, their own discomfort mirroring the regret they felt for remaining silent. Evelyn accepted each gesture with the same warmth and dignity she had shown throughout the night, her quiet resilience leaving an indelible impression on everyone who had witnessed it. And as Marcus stood beside her, he knew that this night, while difficult, had reaffirmed his commitment. The ripple of respect. As the heavy doors of La Belle Amour closed behind Lily, a calm stillness settled over the room, the tension lifting like fog giving way to sunlight. Marcus remained by his mother's side, his posture embodying quiet authority. For the first time that evening, he'd allowed himself to exhale deeply, the lingering frustration finally melting away. His eyes met Evelyn's, and she gave him a reassuring smile, a silent reminder that dignity had won out over pettiness. Around them, the patrons resumed their conversations, but the tone had shifted. Murmurs of respect replaced the whispers of discomfort, and many guests found themselves reflecting on what they had witnessed. In a world where silent prejudice often went unchallenged, seeing it confronted so directly felt rare, almost like a revelation. The couple at the nearby table, who had earlier debated speaking up, exchanged thoughtful glances. They could feel that something significant had transpired, something that extended beyond the evening service and meal. Meanwhile, Marcus approached David, the young server who had shown concern earlier, and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you for your help tonight, David. You showed real professionalism." David nodded, visibly relieved to have been on the right side of the evening's events. "I just want to apologize, sir," David said earnestly, "for not speaking up sooner. I saw how Miss Anderson was being treated, and I should have acted." Marcus shook his head, smiling kindly. Don't worry, David. Sometimes we find ourselves in situations where it's hard to know what to do. What matters is that you noticed, and that awareness will help us all move forward. He gave David's shoulder a reassuring squeeze, hoping to instill a sense of empowerment in him. As Marcus returned to his mother's table, Evelyn took a sip of her coffee, her demeanor still as composed as ever. You handled that well, she remarked softly, a hint of pride in her voice. It's not easy standing up for what's right, especially in a place as formal as this. Marcus looked at her, humbled. Thank you, Mom. I just wanted to make sure that respect is felt by everyone who walks through these doors. Tonight reminded me of how important that is. A few moments later, a figure approached their table, one of the restaurant's long-standing patrons, a distinguished man named Mr. Whitmore, who had been dining with his wife. He looked at Evelyn with a warm smile and inclined his head politely. Mrs. Anderson, I just wanted to say that you handled yourself with remarkable grace tonight. And Marcus, thank you for taking a stand. It's refreshing to see someone place integrity above reputation. Evelyn returned his smile. Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. Dignity, I found, is a language that everyone understands, even if they don't always speak it themselves. Mr. Whitmore chuckled appreciatively, nodding in agreement. Indeed, it was a lesson for all of us. He turned to Marcus, offering his hand. Please keep up the good work. You have loyal patrons in us. After Mr. Whitmore's departure, the entire room seemed to breathe a little easier. It was as though Evelyn's quiet strength and Marcus's firm action had set a new standard, a higher bar of respect that transcended the superficial elegance of the establishment. Meanwhile, back in the staff area, word of the evening's events spread among the employees, sparking a mix of reactions. Some were shocked, others slightly ashamed for not intervening, and a few were genuinely inspired by the evening's outcome. The maitre d', a woman named Claire who had greeted Evelyn earlier with a hint of reluctance, found herself reevaluating her own behavior. Maybe I was too quick to judge, she murmured to herself, watching the dining room from the staff area with a pensive expression. She hadn't actively mistreated Evelyn, but she realized her initial reservation about Evelyn's presence had stemmed from the same prejudices Lily had so blatantly displayed. It dawned on Claire that her role as maitre d' wasn't just about seating people, it was about setting the tone of hospitality for every guest. This revelation humbled her, and she resolved to approach her role with renewed sincerity. She'd become accustomed to catering to wealth and status, but tonight she was reminded of a truth she had overlooked. Respect was universal, and her responsibility extended to every guest equally. In the kitchen, Chef Antoine, the executive chef and culinary genius behind La Belle Amour's menu, had been informed of the evening's events by the sous chef, who admitted to his reluctant compliance with Lily's request to alter Evelyn's dessert. Chef Antoine was a man who prided himself on the excellence and integrity of his food, and he was livid. Salt in the crème brûlée, he hissed, barely able to contain his anger. It's an insult to our craft. And worse, it's an insult to a guest. The sous chef lowered his head, ashamed. I'm sorry, chef. I should have refused, but she was persuasive. Persuasive or not, this isn't the kind of establishment that compromises its standards, Chef Antoine replied firmly. Tomorrow, we'll be having a staff meeting. There will be no more tolerance for disrespect in this kitchen, or anywhere in this restaurant. The sous chef nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Chef Antoine's words were clear. No chef, no server, no manager could ever justify compromising a guest's experience for personal bias. The culinary staff, who overheard the conversation, exchanged solemn glances, each of them silently agreeing to uphold the restaurant's standard with renewed dedication. Back in the dining area, Marcus returned to his mother, who had just finished her dessert, the taste of the carefully prepared crème brûlée erasing the memory of Lily's bitter gesture. Mom, he said softly, thank you for your patience tonight. You reminded me why I wanted to create spaces where respect is as integral as the food itself. Evelyn gave him a warm smile. Marcus, it was your presence, not mine, that brought about this change. You have a remarkable gift, my dear. You've turned that vision of yours into something tangible, something that others can feel when they walk in. I'm proud of you. Their quiet exchange was interrupted by a soft, hesitant voice. Excuse me, Mr. Anderson. It was Claire, the maitre d'. She approached with her hands clasped and a contrite expression on her face. I wanted to apologize, Mrs. Anderson. Claire began, her gaze sincere. I realize now that I didn't greet you with the warmth and respect you deserve. I was too focused on appearances and too quick to judge. I can see now that it was wrong. Evelyn regarded Claire thoughtfully, her gaze kind. Thank you, Claire. I appreciate your words, and I respect your honesty. We all have things to learn, myself included. Claire's shoulders visibly relaxed, a grateful smile spreading across her face. Thank you, Mrs. Anderson. And Mr. Anderson, thank you for reminding us of what true hospitality means. With a parting nod, Claire returned to her post, carrying herself with renewed humility and determination. She resolved that moving forward, every guest she greeted would be met with the respect and dignity they deserved, regardless of any preconceived notions. As the evening came to a close, Evelyn and Marcus lingered at the table, enjoying the calm that had returned to the room. A few more patrons approached, each offering kind words to Evelyn, a nod of respect to Marcus, or simple expressions of support. The ripple of the evening's events extended to nearly every person in the restaurant, a subtle yet profound reminder of the power of a single act of courage and integrity. Before they left, Chef Antoine himself emerged from the kitchen, his chef's whites pristine, his face slightly flushed. He approached Marcus and Evelyn with a respectful nod, his expression earnest. Mrs. Anderson, Mr. Anderson, he began, his voice deep with sincerity. On behalf of the kitchen, please accept my apologies for the unacceptable treatment you received tonight. I assure you that we're making changes to ensure that every dish we serve reflects our commitment to excellence and respect. Evelyn smiled graciously. Thank you, Chef Antoine. The food was exceptional, despite everything. I have no doubt you'll continue to elevate this place to even greater heights. Marcus nodded, extending his hand to the chef. Thank you, Chef. I appreciate your commitment. Tomorrow, we'll start fresh, and together, we'll create an environment where everyone, guest and staff alike, feels valued. As Evelyn and Marcus prepared to leave, Marcus looked around the dining room, his heart swelling with pride and purpose. Tonight had been a challenge, but it had also been a gift, an opportunity to reaffirm the values that had guided him since he opened his first restaurant. He'd always believed in the power of respect, but tonight had reminded him of the responsibility that came with creating spaces where people could truly feel seen and appreciated. As they stepped out into the cool night air, Evelyn took Marcus's arm, her warmth grounding him. They'd walked in silence for a few moments, each reflecting on the events of the evening. Evelyn spoke first, her voice soft but resolute. You know, Marcus, I believe that people learn best by example. Tonight, you set an example that no one in that room will forget. Marcus looked down at her, his heart full. I learned from the best, Mom. And together, they walked down the quiet Manhattan street, leaving behind a restaurant forever changed. A sanctuary that would carry the ripple of respect and dignity forward into every meal, every service, and every interaction to come. Seeds of change. In the days following the eventful evening at La Belle Amour, the restaurant underwent a palpable shift. The once unspoken hierarchy of service that prioritized select guests was dismantled as Marcus implemented a new vision of equality and respect. The staff, accustomed to catering differently based on perceived status, found themselves facing a quiet but necessary reckoning. Every corner of La Belle Amour was infused with a new atmosphere of introspection, respect, and an awareness that transcended mere business etiquette. Early the next morning, Marcus called a meeting in the restaurant's grand yet modest private dining room. The chandeliers cast soft, amber light across the long mahogany table where all staff members gathered, many with expressions of uncertainty. They were unsure of what to expect, as it was rare for the owner to hold a staff meeting, let alone one where the entire team, kitchen, servers, hosts, and management, was present. Marcus entered the room, his demeanor calm but serious, his presence commanding the room's attention. Chef Antoine, ever the figure of culinary authority, sat near the head of the table. The chef had spoken with Marcus the previous evening, agreeing on the importance of establishing a unified standard that would extend from the kitchen to the dining floor. "Thank you all for being here," Marcus began, his voice steady and thoughtful. "As you know, something happened here recently that goes against the very values I built this place on. This isn't just about what happened with my mother. It's about the kind of culture we want to foster, not only for our guests, but for each of you." A silence settled over the room as Marcus's words hung in the air, each staff member absorbing their weight. Marcus paused, allowing everyone to process his words before continuing. "Moving forward, La Belle Amour will be a place where every guest is treated equally and with respect, regardless of appearance, status, or assumptions we might make about them. This isn't just a change in policy, it's a change in mindset. I want each of you to feel proud to be part of a team that treats everyone with the dignity they deserve." As Marcus's eyes moved across the room, they met the gazes of staff members who had witnessed the previous night's events unfold. Some, like David and Claire, nodded in agreement, visibly moved by the clear message. Others looked apprehensive, uncertain of how this change might affect them. Marcus continued, "I know that many of you have been part of this industry long enough to see that some places operate with unspoken rules about whom to prioritize. That ends here. La Belle Amour will set a standard for inclusivity, respect, and equality. And we're going to start by offering training on diversity and empathy, tools that will help us break down the biases we might not even know we hold." Claire, the maitre d', raised her hand. "Mr. Anderson, if I may, last night made me realize my own biases. I wasn't as welcoming as I should have been, and I apologize for that. This change, it's something I know I need. We all do." A ripple of agreement moved through the room, with a few staff members nodding, expressions of understanding and humility on their faces. The previous evening had been a powerful reminder for them all, a lesson in the value of empathy that had opened their eyes to the small, insidious ways prejudice could seep into their daily interactions. Chef Antoine spoke up, his voice authoritative yet kind. "I have always believed that food is a universal language, something that connects us all. But what I saw last night reminded me that our service, too, should be a language of respect. I know this may be an adjustment for some, but it's a necessary one. I, too, will be working to ensure our kitchen operates with the same inclusivity that we expect in the dining room." Marcus nodded, grateful for Antoine's words. The chef's influence was integral to establishing a sense of unity among the team. "Thank you, chef," he said, turning back to the staff. "The changes we're making are going to be positive. I want all of you to feel empowered to create a welcoming experience for every guest, and I'll be here, along with Chef Antoine and the management team, to support you along the way." With that, the meeting concluded. The staff dispersed with a new sense of purpose, many of them exchanging quiet words of encouragement with each other. Some younger servers, inspired by Marcus's words, shared their own stories of subtle bias and disrespect, realizing they were part of a collective change that extended beyond just the restaurant. In the following days, Marcus ensured that the training sessions he had promised took place. The sessions were led by professionals in diversity and inclusion, who guided the staff through exercises that encouraged them to examine their assumptions and biases. They were challenged to place themselves in the shoes of guests who might feel out of place, to consider how it felt to be seen through the lens of a stereotype rather than as a unique individual. These exercises left a powerful impact, creating a newfound empathy that would be carried into each interaction. The restaurant began to transform. Patrons, both new and regular, noticed the changes in service. They could feel the warmth in each greeting, the genuine attentiveness in each server's eyes. Guests who had once felt like afterthoughts in such a high-end space now felt embraced, welcomed, and treated with the same respect as the wealthiest patrons. Evelyn herself returned to dine a few weeks later, this time accompanied by a few friends who had heard of the previous night's events. As she entered, Claire greeted her warmly, her tone genuine and respectful. "Mrs. Anderson, it's an honor to have you back with us," Claire said with a smile, her gaze steady and appreciative. Evelyn noted the difference immediately. This time, Claire's demeanor radiated sincerity, and her welcome felt unforced. The rest of the dining experience followed in the same vein. The servers, including David, were attentive, and even the chef made a special effort to greet Evelyn and her friends, offering his culinary expertise to guide their meal choices. Evelyn's friends, who had initially been hesitant to dine at such a high-end place, were touched by the level of care they received. It was clear that Marcus's changes were taking root, blossoming into a culture of respect and warmth that extended to each person who entered La Belle Amour. The evening passed with a lightness that came from knowing they were genuinely welcome. Beyond the walls of La Belle Amour, Marcus's decision to confront bias resonated in the wider hospitality industry. Other restaurateurs and managers began reaching out, some even requesting advice on how to implement similar training programs. Inspired by the positive feedback, Marcus decided to establish a regular workshop within his company, one that would cover everything from guest treatment to personal biases, a standard he hoped would eventually become widespread in the industry. One evening, a former employee of La Belle Amour, who had left due to what he described as the cutthroat, high-class hierarchy of the place, returned as a guest. He had heard about the changes Marcus had made and wanted to experience the restaurant anew. To his surprise, he was welcomed without question, his presence treated with the same respect as any other guest. As he finished his meal, he approached Marcus, who happened to be on the floor that night. "Mr. Anderson," he said, extending his hand, "I used to work here. When I heard about the changes you made, I couldn't believe it. But tonight, I felt it. This place feels different. It feels like it's for everyone now." Marcus shook his hand, a humble smile gracing his face. "Thank you. That's exactly what I hoped to achieve. And it's thanks to the team, to people like you who recognize that change can make a real difference." Back at his table, the former employee marveled at the transformation, realizing that La Belle Amour had evolved into something he could respect. A place where both guests and staff were respected, their worth valued beyond the superficial. He knew that this shift was rare, a quiet revolution in a space where status had once ruled over substance. As La Belle Amour continued to embrace this new culture, the restaurant flourished. Patrons from diverse backgrounds became regulars, bringing friends, family, and even colleagues to experience the space that was making waves in the city. Word of mouth spread about the restaurant with a remarkable respect, and soon it became a standard in the hospitality industry. To many, it was more than just a dining experience. It was a space where they could feel respected, seen, and treated with kindness. In the quiet moments after closing, Marcus would often walk through the dining room, the warm glow of the chandeliers casting shadows across the tables. He could almost see the quiet strength of his mother in every corner, feel her dignity in the air, and he knew that her grace had been the catalyst, the foundation on which he had built this sanctuary of respect. As he looked out over the empty tables, Marcus felt a deep sense of fulfillment. It wasn't just about food or service. It was about creating a place where humanity took precedence, a place where dignity was the only reservation required. He knew that La Belle Amour would continue to carry this legacy forward, each meal served with the warmth of true hospitality, a testament to the belief that everyone deserved to feel at home, respected, and valued. A legacy of dignity. Months after the transformative evening, at La Belle Amour, the restaurant's new culture had not only taken root, but had begun to flourish in ways Marcus had never imagined. What started as a single confrontation with bias had become the cornerstone of a legacy that would extend far beyond the walls of his restaurant. Word of La Belle Amour's commitment to equality and respect had spread across New York City. Food critics who once praised the restaurant solely for its exquisite cuisine now highlighted its atmosphere of inclusivity, dubbing it the place where everyone belongs. Marcus was moved by the influx of letters, emails, and messages from patrons who had visited since the changes. Many recounted how they felt seen, valued, and respected, emotions that were often rare in such upscale establishments. Evelyn, the quiet catalyst of this transformation, visited frequently. Each time she entered, she noticed the warmth in every greeting, the genuine smiles of the staff, and the care extended to each guest, regardless of their background or appearance. She watched her son's vision come to life, proud not only of the change he had implemented, but also of the lives he had touched in the process. Every time she dined, her table was a gathering place for old friends and new acquaintances alike, all brought together by the restaurant's unique blend of grace and hospitality. Marcus had gone a step further in establishing training programs across his entire restaurant portfolio. But La Belle Amour remained the crown jewel of his growing empire, a beacon of his values. He had also become a sought-after speaker in the hospitality industry, invited to share his insights on creating welcoming environments. Other restaurateurs reached out, inspired by Marcus's approach to redefining high-end dining. Through this network, he had begun consulting for other establishments across the city, spreading the principles that had shaped his vision. Meanwhile, within La Belle Amour, the staff continued to adapt and grow in ways that surprised even themselves. David, the young server who had initially struggled with his silence during Evelyn's experience, was now the lead trainer for new hires. His sessions focused not only on service etiquette, but on the importance of empathy. He shared his personal journey openly, explaining how that pivotal evening had taught him to embrace every guest as deserving of respect. "I once watched a guest go through something they didn't deserve," David would tell each new group of hires, "and I stayed silent when I shouldn't have. I learned that night that silence can speak just as loudly as action, and now my job is to make sure none of you have to learn that lesson the hard way." The story of Evelyn's experience and Marcus's response became something of a legend among the staff, a grounding reminder of why they were there. It gave each of them a purpose beyond simply serving food. They were part of something bigger, a mission to make La Belle Amour a place of dignity, where both guests and employees felt valued. One evening, while Evelyn was dining with a group of friends, she noticed a young couple seated nearby, their expressions a mix of awe and wonder. The woman, visibly pregnant, looked around with teary eyes, her hand resting on her partner's. Evelyn, ever curious and compassionate, leaned over, offering a warm smile. "Is everything all right?" she asked gently, sensing a story behind their visible emotion. The woman nodded, dabbing her eyes. "Yes, more than all right. I hope you don't mind me sharing, but we've never been somewhere like this, somewhere we felt welcome." She paused, searching for words. "We don't usually go to places like this. There's always this feeling, like we don't belong. But tonight, from the moment we walked in, everyone treated us like we were meant to be here." Evelyn's eyes softened with understanding. "I know that feeling well. And I want you to know, dear, you belong here just as much as anyone else." She looked around the restaurant, pride filling her heart as she observed the staff carrying out Marcus's vision. "This is a place built on the belief that everyone deserves respect." The woman nodded, her smile growing. "Thank you. That means a lot." Their brief exchange reflected what Marcus had hoped La Belle Amour could become: a sanctuary, a reminder that people were more than their appearances or assumptions made about them. That couple would leave that night with a memory of acceptance, a simple but transformative experience they would carry with them long after. Back in the kitchen, Chef Antoine continued to uphold his commitment to excellence, his leadership setting the standard for every dish prepared. He, too, had noticed the change in the restaurant's energy. His once stoic approach had softened, replaced by a greater awareness of how even the kitchen's attitude impacted the experience of each guest. One evening, Chef Antoine gathered his team before the start of dinner service. He looked around at the familiar faces of the cooks, the line chefs, the sous chefs who helped bring his creations to life. "I want you all to remember something," he began, his voice deep and thoughtful. "What we do here, the dishes we create, it's about more than just taste. It's about how our food makes people feel. Every plate we send out is a part of this experience, a part of the message that Mr. Anderson and Mrs. Anderson have built. And tonight, let's serve with that purpose in mind." His words struck a chord, and the team moved forward with renewed purpose. They understood that they weren't simply chefs and cooks. They were ambassadors of respect, a value communicated through each careful detail of their craft. As the months rolled on, La Belle Amour continued to grow in reputation, drawing patrons from all walks of life. Marcus would often look around the restaurant, taking in the diversity of the guests, the warmth in every interaction, and the subtle ways that his mother's influence had reshaped the culture. The story of Evelyn's quiet dignity and Marcus's decisive action had reached beyond the confines of La Belle Amour, spreading to the wider community. Local organizations began inviting Marcus and Evelyn to speak about their journey and the importance of inclusivity. Inspired by Marcus's actions, several restaurants in New York City began adopting similar practices, building an industry-wide shift that emphasized respect over exclusivity. One evening, Marcus was invited to speak at a gathering of hospitality leaders in the city. As he stood before the audience, he recalled his mother's experience, his voice carrying a blend of pride and purpose. "When we talk about hospitality, we're talking about the art of making people feel welcome. But that goes deeper than just offering fine food and polished service. It's about seeing each guest as a person, someone with their own story, their own experiences. We can change lives by simply choosing respect over judgment." After his speech, a young restaurant owner approached him, eyes bright with admiration. "Mr. Anderson, your story changed my approach to my own restaurant. I never realized how much impact we have in creating safe spaces for people. Thank you." As Marcus returned to La Belle Amour that evening, he was greeted by his staff with warm smiles and the familiar sounds of service. His mother was there too, seated at a table in the corner, enjoying a quiet meal. She waved him over, and he joined her, taking in the comforting ambience around them. "Look at what you've built," Evelyn said, her eyes shining with pride. "Not just this restaurant, but something much bigger. You've created a place where people can feel seen." "That's rare, Marcus." Marcus reached across the table, taking her hand gently. "I owe it all to you, Mom. You taught me what it means to live with dignity, to see others through a lens of empathy. This is as much your legacy as it is mine." Evelyn smiled, a quiet understanding passing between them. They sat in comfortable silence, watching as servers moved gracefully between tables, each interaction a testament to the values they had instilled. The restaurant hummed with life, a symphony of connection, warmth, and respect. Marcus knew that La Belle Amour would continue to thrive, not just as a high-end dining establishment, but as a sanctuary where every guest felt cherished. As they left the restaurant that night, Marcus and Evelyn walked arm in arm through the vibrant streets of Manhattan, their hearts full. They knew that the legacy they had built would endure, that La Belle Amour had become more than just a place to eat. It was a beacon of humanity, a reminder that dignity and respect could change lives in ways both big and small. For Marcus, this was only the beginning. He would carry this mission into every restaurant he owned, every space he touched, ensuring that the legacy of La Belle Amour would live on, inspiring kindness, empathy, and an unwavering commitment to the dignity of all. And Evelyn, his guiding light, would be at the heart of it all. her quiet strength echoing through each moment, each gesture, and each soul who walked through their doors. In the end, they had not just changed a restaurant, they had changed the world around them, one act of respect at a time.